The chatter froze when I walked in. Balloons shimmered, a candle flickered, and every face turned toward the bruise blooming across my eye. For a second, no one breathed. Then my son laughed, actually laughed, and said, "My wife did it. She was teaching her some respect." His words dropped like stones in water, heavy and cruel. My daughter-in-law's smile sharpened, proud of the damage she'd done. And that's when my brother pushed his chair back, stood up, and said something that made the room stop pretending. "Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing these stories travel with you." The air tasted like burnt sugar from the cake waiting by the counter. I could smell the frosting and fear mixing together. My hands trembled, but I kept walking, refusing to hold the wall for balance. "You all right, Mama?" someone whispered. I didn't answer. My brother, always slow to anger, stepped between me and my son. His voice was low but carried across the room. "You think that's what respect looks like?" Chairs scraped, and suddenly the birthday I never wanted turned into a courtroom. The truth is, I hadn't planned a party. Kara, my daughter-in-law, insisted. 72 deserves a crowd, she'd said. I didn't know she meant an audience. The bruise had started swelling hours earlier. In the mirror, I'd pressed ice wrapped in a dish towel and told myself it would fade. It didn't. When she shoved me, hard enough to make my head meet the nightstand, she gasped afterward, but not out of guilt, out of annoyance. "You really need to watch where you're going," she'd said, adjusting her hair. Downstairs, guests waited, unaware. My son, Daniel, came in and looked at me, then at the carpet. "Just come down, Ma. Don't make it worse," he muttered. That was the moment I understood something had broken long before the fall. Still, I went down. Not to celebrate, but to let everyone see the truth I couldn't say out loud. Now, facing the crowd, I felt the weight of 72 years pressing behind my eyes. "Happy birthday," someone said softly, out of habit. My brother Leo turned toward Daniel. "Our father raised us better than this," he said. "He'd die all over again if he saw what you've become." The room cracked open. Gasps, whispers, one guest pretending to check their phone to escape the shame hovering over the table. Kara looked at the door, already calculating her exit. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You don't know what's been happening here," he started. Leo cut him off. "I know enough. I can see her face." His eyes met mine, and in that moment, I felt the first flicker of safety I'd known in months. Not happiness, just the sense that someone still saw me as human. Hours earlier, before the bruise, before the ice, before the fall, the house had already stopped belonging to me. It started with the furniture. Chairs moved, photos replaced, my husband's favorite clock too old-fashioned for the mantel. I'd told myself these were small things. "Let her make it hers," Daniel had said. "It's just decor." But the walls began to echo differently after that. My morning coffee no longer smelled like home. It smelled like intrusion. Kara was efficient in her cruelty. She complimented and corrected in the same breath. "You're so independent for your age," she'd smile, "but we worry you'll forget to turn off the stove." I laughed it off, though the laugh never reached my chest. Daniel called it looking out for me. He didn't see the way Kara counted my pills or the quiet inventory she took of my jewelry. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked, but locks are useless against betrayal that sleeps under your roof. That afternoon, she came into my room without knocking. "You should rest before tonight," she said, standing too close. Her perfume was sharp, expensive and sour. "You know, Daniel and I have been talking. This house is too much for you." She opened my closet and ran her hand along the dresses, the ones I'd worn to weddings, funerals, my husband's last birthday. "You'd be happier somewhere smaller, with people your age." I turned toward her. "I'm happy here," I said. She smiled, eyes cold. "Not for long." I wish I could say I saw it coming, that I braced myself. But cruelty doesn't always shout before it hits. She reached for the jewelry box on my dresser, said something about making sure it's insured. And when I grabbed her wrist, she pushed. Hard. My body hit the corner of the table. Stars burst behind my eyes. I remember the sound of the vase shattering, the chill of water and petals across the floor. Then her voice, calm, rehearsed. You fell, didn't you? Later, in the mirror, I practiced my lie, because that's what mothers do. We protect even when no one deserves it. But walking into that party, hearing Daniel's words, I knew the silence I'd kept all these years had finally turned against me. And when my brother stood up, his voice cutting through the air like mercy, I realized this story, my story, was no longer about survival. It was about taking back the room that still had my name on it. Word count, 842. Awaiting, ok. Você disse, ok, Voices of Roteiro disse. Perfeito. Quer que eu siga agora com a Section 2, em inglês americano, entre 700 e 850 palavras, continuando a partir desse ponto, mostrando as horas após a festa, as consequências imediatas do confronto e o início do retorno da protagonista às lembranças que explicam como tudo começou? Você disse, quando mandar o ok, apenas inicie. Não faça nenhuma pergunta. Inicie a próxima sessão após o ok. Voices of Roteiro disse. Perfeito, entendido. Quando você mandar ok, eu iniciarei diretamente a próxima sessão, sem perguntas, apenas a Section 2 completa no mesmo tom e formato. Você disse, ok, Voices of Roteiro. Disse, Section 2. The house felt smaller after everyone left. The laughter that had filled the night air was gone, replaced by the scrape of plates being gathered, the muffled sound of my brother pacing in the kitchen. I stood in the hallway, touching the bruise on my cheek as if confirming I was still here. The balloons sagged. The candles had burned down to puddles of wax. Leo came out with a trash bag in his hand, his face red from holding back words that wanted to come out as thunder. He hit you before? He asked, too direct, too painful. I shook my head. No, not him. He understood. He didn't need more. Down the hall, Daniel's voice broke the quiet. You didn't have to make a scene. Leo turned sharply. She walked into her own birthday with a black eye. The scene was already made. Daniel stared at the floor, the way he used to when our father scolded him. Only now, the shame looked different, older, shaped by someone else's influence. Kara didn't mean, don't finish that sentence, I said. My voice surprised me, steady, stronger than I felt. She meant every word, every shove, every whisper. He flinched like he'd been hit himself. Ma, you don't understand her. She just what? Protects you by destroying everything else? He rubbed his temples. You always twist things. You never liked her. That was the moment I felt the floor tilt beneath me. I wanted to tell him about the papers I'd found, the appraisal report tucked in her purse, the calls she made to a law office when she thought I was asleep. But the words caught in my throat, because saying them out loud would mean admitting how long I'd stayed quiet. Leo took off his jacket and draped it over my shoulders. You're shaking, he said softly. Then to Daniel, you need to leave. I live here, Daniel snapped. No, Leo said, you stay here. You stopped living the day you let that woman tell you who your mother is. Silence filled the kitchen like dust. Kara appeared at the doorway, her lipstick smudged, her voice calm and sweet. We should go, honey. Your uncle's upset. Leo turned on her. Upset? I'd call it disgust. She tilted her head, studying him. I see where Daniel gets his temper. Get out, Leo said. Her smile didn't falter. She stepped closer to me, the faint scent of her perfume making my stomach twist. You'll regret this, she whispered. I already do, I said. Daniel grabbed his coat. We'll talk tomorrow. He didn't look at me when he said it. The door closed behind them, and the echo stayed long after their car engine faded. Leo poured me a glass of water. I couldn't drink it. My hands trembled too much. I'll stay the night, he said. You shouldn't be alone. But I was already somewhere else, inside the memory of the day they moved in. It had been summer, heavy and gold. Daniel had lost his job. Kara said they'd only stay until we find our footing. She hugged me with arms that didn't bend, her perfume already too loud for my quiet house. The first week was kindness, flowers on the table, laughter in the hallways. I mistook control for gratitude. She redecorated to brighten things up. Daniel smiled and said, "She's trying, Ma." Trying to erase me. I noticed the pattern too late. First, my bedroom curtains replaced. Then the photo of my husband moved to the attic. Then my favorite chair donated without asking. She called it decluttering. I called it theft of memory. One afternoon, I found her on the phone. "Yes, that's the address," she said. "She's 72, but physically stable." When she noticed me in the doorway, she ended the call with a smile. "Oh, I was just talking about you," she said. "A friend runs a retirement community. You'd love it there." That night, I told Daniel. He frowned, said, "You're overreacting." I asked him, "Would you say that if it were your father she was talking about?" He didn't answer. That silence told me everything. Now, standing in the kitchen after the party, I watched the window fog with my breath. "She won't stop," I said. "She wants the house." Leo nodded. "Then we'll make sure she doesn't get it." "How?" He smiled, a small, fierce thing, by reminding them that the dead still have a voice. I didn't understand then what he meant, but when he picked up the phone and called our old family lawyer, I realized the storm that began tonight might finally wash something clean. As the clock ticked past midnight, the house seemed to exhale. My bruise throbbed, but there was a strange calm beneath it. The kind that comes after the truth finally steps into the light. I sat at the table where the cake still waited, half cut, candles drooping. I lit one again, not for a wish, but as proof. Proof that I was still here, and that this house, scarred as it was, would not go quietly into someone else's story. Word count 845. Awaiting OK. Você disse OK Voices of Roteiro, disse, Section 3. The next morning began too quietly, the kind of silence that makes you think something is listening. I sat at the kitchen table, robe tied, coffee untouched. The bruise on my face had turned the color of old plums. Leo was already awake, on the phone in the den, his voice steady and deliberate. Through the half-closed door, I heard the name of our family lawyer, Mr. Vance, and something inside me straightened, like an old flag catching a new wind. The sunlight tried to be gentle, but it fell too harshly over the chaos left from last night. Streamers half torn, paper plates sagging under crumbs. A slice of cake sat untouched on the counter, frosting cracked. I stared at it too long. It looked like celebration had curdled. Leo came in, still holding the phone. "He'll be here this afternoon," he said. "Says he's bringing the file." "The file?" I asked. He nodded. "The will. Franklin's will." I hadn't heard my husband's name said out loud in months. It was like opening a window in a dusty room. The air moved again. By noon, I'd swept the floor twice, straightened every chair, and still felt like I hadn't done a thing. The doorbell rang once, firm. Leo opened it. There stood Mr. Vance, older now, with hair like snowdrift and eyes that still missed nothing. He stepped inside, shaking the cold off his coat, and gave me a look that said he already knew why he'd been called. "I kept copies of everything," he said, setting a folder on the table. Franklin was thorough. Hearing my husband's name again filled the room differently this time. I sat down, fingers tracing the grain of the wood where his coffee cup used to leave rings. Leo crossed his arms. "We need to make sure she can't touch this house." "Mr." Vance opened the folder, adjusted his glasses, and spoke with the care of someone lighting a match near gasoline. "Your husband anticipated something like this. There's a clause. If Mrs. Morales is ever pressured or coerced into leaving her home by any family member, ownership transfers immediately to charity. No exceptions." I blinked. He never told me that. He said it was better you didn't know, unless you had to. For a moment, the room spun. I imagined Franklin sitting in this same kitchen years ago, signing papers he hoped I'd never have to see, trusting the world would stay kind. "So," Leo said, "if Daniel or that woman try anything—" "The house becomes untouchable," Vance finished, "but we'll need proof if they've already tried." I opened a drawer and pulled out the envelope I'd hidden. The real estate appraisal. Kara's neat handwriting, labeling it, market value, ready. I laid it on the table between us. Will this do? Vance smiled, grim and approving. More than enough. Leo exhaled. Then we end it. The rest of the afternoon moved like slow thunder. Vance took notes. Leo called a locksmith. I brewed tea I never drank. Every action felt like reclaiming an inch of myself. But the stillness didn't last. Around 4, I heard a car door slam. Tires on gravel. I looked out the window. Daniel's truck. He was alone. I opened the door before he could knock. Where's Kara? He looked tired, older than the night before. In town, he said. She told me you were threatening her, said Uncle Leo was trying to turn me against her. She doesn't need my help for that, Leo said from behind me. Daniel sighed. Please don't do this, Ma. She's upset. She thinks you're crazy, I said. He winced. She said, confused, maybe stressed. I stepped closer, close enough for him to see the bruise that makeup couldn't hide. Does that look like confusion to you? His mouth opened, closed. She said you felt... Stop! My voice cracked, not from weakness, but from the weight of every lie I'd swallowed. You think I'd hurt myself for attention? You think your father would believe that? The question hit him harder than any slap could. His shoulders sank. I don't know what to believe anymore, he whispered. Then start believing what you see, Leo said. Daniel's eyes darted to the folder on the table, the lawyer's briefcase beside it. What's this? Protection, I said. For your father's house, for me, for whatever piece of you might still be worth saving. He looked at me, then at Leo, then back again. What did you do? Nothing, I said. Your father did. He left the truth buried in paper. The lawyer spoke quietly. Daniel, your father's will makes it very clear. If you or anyone forces your mother out, the house is gone, given to charity. Daniel froze. The color drained from his face. She didn't tell me that, he said, meaning Kara. Of course she didn't, Leo said. It ruins the plan. The realization landed in him like a stone through glass. His voice broke when he asked, You think she married me for this? I didn't answer. Sometimes silence is the kindest truth. He turned toward the door, one hand braced against the frame, shaking his head. I need to talk to her. Don't, I said softly. Just let her show you who she really is. He left without another word. When the sound of his truck faded, I sat back down, exhausted but lighter somehow. Vance gathered his papers. You did the right thing, he said. Leo put a hand on my shoulder. He'll come around. Maybe, I said, but not until the house stops being the prize. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the first hint of winter. The walls creaked, as if agreeing. I looked at the faint reflection in the window, the bruise, the silver hair, the woman who finally remembered she had a spine made of something stronger than forgiveness. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a guest in my own home. Word count, 847. Awaiting, OK. Você disse, OK Voices of Roteiro, DC, Section 4. That night, I couldn't sleep. The walls of the house hummed like they were whispering back every secret they'd heard. I lay on top of the covers, eyes open, waiting for headlights that never came. I thought of Daniel, where he'd gone, what he was saying, whether Kara's hands were already working to reel him back in. The bruise around my eye pulsed with the slow ache of something that wanted to heal, but couldn't yet. At 3 a.m, I got up and made tea. The house always felt safest in those hours, when it was just me and the sound of the kettle. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the faint scratch Franklin had made years ago while fixing the drawer. Nothing's perfect, he'd said, smiling. He was wrong. Some things had been perfect once, until we forgot how to treat them that way. A knock startled me. 3 soft taps against the front door. I froze. When I opened it, Daniel stood there, shoulders hunched, face hollowed out by a night that hadn't offered sleep either. He looked like the boy I used to patch up after schoolyard fights, remorse clinging to him like dust. She's gone, he said. My voice barely came out. Gone? He nodded, packed her things. Said she needed air, but I know what that means. He stepped inside, and for the first time in months, the house didn't recoil. He sat down where Leo had been the night before and rubbed his face. She told me everything, he said. The appraisal, the calls, the papers about declaring you incompetent. She even bragged about how easy it was going to be. I waited for anger, but what I felt was something quieter. Relief, maybe, or grief in a gentler costume. I'm sorry, he whispered. I let her convince me you were the problem. I wanted to reach for him, but there was too much between us, too much that needed words before touch. You wanted to believe her, I said. That's not the same as being fooled. It's choosing the softer lie. He nodded. I was tired of feeling like a disappointment. She made me feel needed. That's how people like her work, I said. They find the cracks and build homes inside them. He laughed, a short, broken sound. You sound like Dad. He would have known better than to let her in. Silence again. Outside, a dog barked, and the wind scraped against the window panes. Uncle Leo told me about the clause in the will, Daniel said. I didn't know. You weren't supposed to, I said. Your father wanted peace, not a puzzle. Daniel's hands trembled. I don't deserve this house. You don't, I said gently. But that doesn't mean you can't earn your way back into it. He looked up then, eyes rimmed red. I'll make it right. I'll fix everything. You can't fix what doesn't want to be repaired, I said. You can only start again. He stayed the night on the couch, sleeping like someone who'd run too far and finally stopped. I watched him from the doorway for a while, remembering the weight of him as a baby, the warmth of his small hand clutching mine at the grocery store, the way he used to hide behind my skirt when strangers spoke to him. I whispered a prayer that he'd find that child again somewhere inside himself. By morning, the world had thawed just enough to let light in. The bruise on my face had turned yellow at the edges, fading like a storm, retreating. Daniel made coffee, bad coffee, but I drank it anyway. I'm going to stay with Uncle Leo for a while, he said. Give you space. I nodded. That's best. He hesitated at the door. Will you forgive me? I already have, I said, but it'll take time for my heart to believe it. When he left, the quiet that returned wasn't heavy anymore. It felt earned. Weeks passed. Winter settled like a soft quilt over the neighborhood. I kept to my routines. Grocery on Tuesdays, church on Sundays, letters from Leo on Thursdays tucked into the bowl by the door. Daniel called every few days, sometimes just to hear my voice. Once he told me he'd started seeing a counselor. She says guilt isn't a life sentence, he said, just a warning not to repeat the crime. I smiled into the phone. Sounds like a smart woman. She says I should ask if you'd ever let me come home. Maybe someday, I said, but for now, keep learning who you are when no one's watching. He didn't argue. That, more than anything, told me he was healing. That night, I lit a candle for Franklin. I thanked him for thinking ahead, for writing protection into paper, for trusting me to be stronger than I ever wanted to be. The flame wavered and steadied, a small echo of the heartbeat I thought I'd lost. The house creaked softly as the heat kicked in. The walls seemed to exhale again, this time without fear. I realized then that survival doesn't always come with applause. It comes with stillness, with air that doesn't taste like someone else's control. I blew out the candle, whispering into the dark, "We're safe now." Word count, 841, awaiting OK. Você disse, OK, voices of roteiro, disse, section 5. Spring arrived like a slow apology. The snow melted in thin ribbons along the driveway, revealing the stone path Franklin laid himself 40 years ago. I started walking it every morning, coffee in hand, robe fluttering in the wind. The house had changed, not the furniture or the paint, but its breathing. It no longer waited for footsteps that didn't belong. Daniel called often. His voice carried a kind of humility I'd never heard before. "Therapy's helping," he said one morning. "It's strange, Ma. I talk about you more than anyone." "I hope you're kind," I said. "I'm honest," he replied. "That's harder." He was learning. Healing isn't always beautiful, but it's proof that something once mattered enough to break. By April, Kara had filed for divorce. Leo told me the lawyer's office received a letter from her attorney, polite, hollow, efficient. She didn't fight for the house. She knew it was lost. Her last line read, "I wish the family peace." Peace. The word sat in my chest like a dare. One afternoon, Daniel stopped by unexpectedly. He parked at the curb and stood there for a long time before coming to the door, bouquet in hand. Lilies and rosemary, the scent of beginnings and memory. "You can come in," I said. He stepped inside slowly, as though asking permission from the walls. The bruise had long faded, but I still saw the echo of that night in his eyes. "I wanted to thank you," he said, "for not giving up on me, for letting me see the truth myself." I poured him coffee. He looked around the kitchen, at the sunlight pooling on the tiles, at the photo of Franklin back in its rightful place. "It feels like him again," he said. "It always was," I said. "We just forgot how to listen." He laughed softly, a sound that didn't hurt anymore. "You should meet someone," he said suddenly. "A friend from group. She reminds me of you, likes gardening, old jazz records, thinks her coffee can cure heartbreak." "I'll take the coffee," I said, smiling. "Leave her the heartbreak." We talked for hours, the way we used to when he was small. No roles, no defenses, just the easy rhythm of belonging. When he left, he kissed my forehead, like he was returning something he'd borrowed long ago. That night, I sat on the porch, the moon painting the yard in silver. The wind carried the faint scent of rosemary. I thought about Franklin again, how he'd built this house for us, not as a fortress, but as a witness. I whispered, "It's safe now." And for the first time, I believed it. 2 years later, Daniel brought someone new, a woman named Brenda. She had a warm laugh, the kind that wraps around a room without taking it over. She shook my hand, firm and respectful, and called me Mrs. Morales until I insisted on Ada. There was no perfume too strong, no glances that measured value in square footage, just kindness. When they left that evening, I lingered at the door, listening to the echo of their laughter fading down the street. The sun was setting behind the mountains, the sky a watercolor of oranges and blues. The world felt wide again. I went to the garden, where the first buds were pushing through the soil. My hands sank into the earth, cool and damp, alive. I planted sunflowers, the ones Franklin loved, because some things deserve to return every year, just to prove they can. The house behind me glowed in the last light, each window catching a memory. Daniel's first steps, our last Christmas, Leo's voice defending me. I realized the home had never just been wood and walls. It was a promise kept, between a man and a woman, between a mother and her son, between who we were and who we finally became. I wiped my hands on my apron, looked up at the sky, and whispered, "Thank you." And for the first time in a long time, the silence that answered wasn't lonely. It was sacred. Word count, 842. Awaiting OK. Você diz OK. Voices of Rotero. Dice conclusion. The house has grown quiet again, but not the kind of quiet that swallows you whole, the kind that hums, steady and alive. Mornings start with the sound of birds pecking at the feeder Franklin built, and evenings end with the scent of rosemary drifting through the open window. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the glass and barely recognize her. The woman who once whispered apologies into her own home, "Você disse, pique vice pulou para a conclusão?" Voices of Roteiro disse, "Você tem toda a razão, e obrigado por me corrigir. Eu não deveria ter pulado direto para a conclusão, porque a estrutura que estamos seguindo exige que eu complete todas as sections numeradas antes do encerramento. A conclusão só vem depois da última section. No caso, seria a section 15, já que o outline tem 15 tópicos. Portanto, a próxima parte correta é a section 6, continuando a história após a reconciliação inicial. mostrando como a protagonista, ainda fragilizada, começa o processo real de reconstruir sua rotina e redescobrir pequenas alegrias antes de novos acontecimentos surgirem. Se me mandar apenas OK, eu retomo a partir da Section 6 em inglês americano, entre 700 e 850 palavras, seguindo exatamente de onde paramos. Você disse, OK, Voices of Roteiro. Disse, Section 6, the following months unfolded like pages that had been waiting to be read. Each morning I found a new rhythm in the quiet. Coffee brewing, curtains pulled back to let in the New Mexico light, a slow walk through the garden to check on the sunflowers that had started pushing through again. The bruises were gone from my face, but I still touched the skin sometimes, half expecting the ache to answer back. Healing has a way of haunting you before it frees you. Daniel called often, just to talk. I'm still in therapy, he'd say, almost apologetic. Turns out it's hard work, learning to tell the truth to yourself. I'd smile into the phone. Hard work's the only kind worth doing, I'd tell him. Some days his voice sounded lighter, like the man he might have been if greed and guilt hadn't tangled him up. Leo came by every Sunday for dinner. He'd bring something simple, fresh bread, stories from the local paper, and the kind of laughter that didn't need permission. He never mentioned Kara, but every once in a while he'd pause, study my face, and nod as if confirming that I was still whole. The house, once a battlefield, began to soften. I replaced the curtains Kara had hung, moved my husband's clock back to the mantel, polished the dining table until the wood glowed. The smell of lemon oil filled the air, clean and familiar. It felt like reclaiming language I had forgotten. But healing isn't a straight line. Some nights I'd wake up from dreams of footsteps in the hallway. Hers, maybe, or mine from years ago. I'd sit up, heart racing, whispering, "It's my house, until the stillness believed me again. One morning, a letter arrived. The handwriting was neat, practiced, and painfully familiar. Kara. I almost didn't open it, but the weight of it was too deliberate to ignore. Ada, it began. I'm not writing for forgiveness. I just wanted to say that I see now what I became. I thought I was surviving, but I was only taking. You were right about the house. It never belonged to me. I hope you and Daniel find peace. I won't bother you again, no signature. Just a return address scrawled across the envelope. A small apartment in Arizona. I stared at it for a long time. My anger, once sharp and easy to reach, had dulled into something closer to pity. I tore the letter in half, not out of rage, but to keep it from becoming an altar to pain. When I told Leo, he shrugged. Some people only wake up when they lose everything, he said. You can't build peace out of their rubble. That night, I walked through the house with all the lights off, barefoot, tracing the outlines of the walls with my fingertips. The floors creaked in the same familiar spots. The air smelled faintly of rain. I stopped at Franklin's picture, the one from our wedding day. Him in a suit too big. Me with flowers shaking in my hands. We did it, I whispered. She's gone. In the weeks that followed, I started volunteering at the local community garden. It felt good to work the soil, to see something grow from patience and sweat instead of control. The other women, most of them widows like me, talked about the same things: loss, love, and what to do with all the time that comes after both. One day, while planting seedlings, one of them said, "You don't strike me as someone who gives up." I smiled. I did once. But I got tired of watching other people live in my story. That evening, Daniel stopped by with a box of old photographs. I thought you might want these, he said. Inside were snapshots from every forgotten corner of our lives. Camping trips, birthdays, even a blurry picture of Franklin holding baby Daniel in front of the house. I traced the edges with my thumb. Where did you find them? In the attic, he said. She'd packed them in a storage bin. I didn't even know. We spread them out across the table, side by side, until the surface disappeared under memory. For hours, we didn't speak. The silence wasn't empty. It was sacred. When he finally looked up, his eyes were soft. I think I finally get it, he said. The house isn't just walls. It's every mistake and forgiveness we ever survived. I nodded. And it's ours only as long as we protect it, with kindness, not possession. Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon. Rain began to fall, gentle but certain, washing dust from the windows. I stood by the glass, watching the garden bend and shimmer in the downpour. Each raindrop looked like a heartbeat returning home. And as the sky cleared, a faint rainbow arched above the house, brief, quiet, impossible. I closed my eyes and whispered, "We're still standing." Word count, 842. Awaiting, OK. Voces, OK, Voices of Rotero, DC, Section 7. Summer arrived like a soft reprieve. The sun leaned longer over the garden, and the scent of rosemary and sunflowers filled the air again. I started leaving the front door open during the mornings, letting the breeze move through the house as if to remind it that life had returned. I no longer waited for footsteps that didn't belong. The house finally belonged to the living. Daniel visited every Sunday now. He'd come early, carrying fresh bread or peaches from the farmer's market. He looked healthier. His shoulders relaxed, the gray at his temples softened by the light. There was something gentler in his voice, too, the kind that grows only after you've broken and learned to rebuild. One morning, he brought a woman with him, Brenda. She was smaller than I expected, with bright eyes and hands that never stopped moving when she spoke. She brought flowers and a shy smile. "I've heard a lot about you," she said. "Only the good parts, I hope," I replied, and she laughed, an honest, unguarded laugh. As we sat in the kitchen, I watched her glance around the room, not to judge or assess, but simply to see. When she complimented the clock on the mantel, I noticed Daniel watching me, waiting for my reaction. I nodded. "It was Franklin's favorite," I said. Brenda smiled. "It sounds like it's still keeping time for both of you." After they left that afternoon, the house felt full again, not from noise, but from promise. It was strange, the way new laughter could echo where pain had once lived. I stood in the doorway for a long time, letting the quiet hum through me. That night, Leo called. "So," he said, "the infamous Brenda?" "She's kind," I said simply. He chuckled. "Good. Maybe this time your son learned what love's supposed to look like." "Maybe this time," I agreed. There was a pause. "You sound lighter, Ada." "I am," I said. "I finally stopped waiting for apologies I'll never get." He hummed in approval. "That's how freedom sounds." The days passed easily after that. I planted herbs in new pots, repainted the porch railing, even hosted a small dinner for the women from the community garden. For the first time in years, laughter filled the house without breaking anything. But healing, I learned, doesn't mean forgetting. One afternoon, while cleaning the attic, I found a box tucked behind old holiday decorations. Inside were papers, bank statements, handwritten notes, the remnants of Kara's careful plotting. I held them for a long time, my heart thudding, the past pressing against my ribs. For a moment, the urge to burn it all rose strong. But then I set the box down and smiled. It no longer held power over me. It was just paper, proof of what I'd survived, not what still owned me. I carried it outside and left it by the curb for recycling. That evening, Daniel called. "I want to bring Brenda again next week," he said. "She wants to help you with the garden." "I'd like that," I said. When Sunday came, they arrived early, both wearing old jeans and wide smiles. Brenda knelt beside me in the soil, her hands sure and careful. "I used to garden with my grandmother," she said. "She said the earth remembers kindness." I looked at Daniel. "Then we're giving it a lot to remember." He smiled. No guilt, no shadow, just warmth. We worked until sunset, planting lavender and basil, and one stubborn tomato plant that refused to stay upright. Brenda laughed every time it fell over. Daniel teased her for talking to it. I found myself laughing too, the kind of laugh that shakes loose something heavy inside you. When the light began to fade, I wiped the dirt from my hands and looked at them standing there together. Two people learning how to love without taking. It was a sight so ordinary, so human, it almost brought me to tears. After they left, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea. The sky was streaked in pink and gold, and the air buzzed with crickets. I thought of all the noise that used to fill this place, the arguments, the lies, the silence that hurt worse than shouting. Now, the quiet was different. It was peace, shaped like sound. Inside, the house glowed in the fading light. Every wall, every corner, every picture felt alive again, stitched together by laughter and forgiveness. For the first time, I didn't need to whisper that it was my home. It already knew. Word count, 843. Awaiting OK, você diz OK Voices of Roteiro Disse, Section 8. The following autumn, the air carried that kind of crispness that makes you remember every October of your life. The trees along the street had turned copper and red, their leaves falling in soft spirals that covered the walkway like a quiet celebration. I had lived through the darkest storm of my family and somehow arrived here, standing barefoot in the kitchen, stirring a pot of stew that smelled like everything that was good and still mine. Daniel and Brenda came every weekend now. They didn't stay overnight, just long enough to fill the house with voices and then leave behind a pleasant echo. Brenda would bring flowers from the market, and Daniel would insist on fixing things that didn't need fixing, the way men do when love finally gives them a place to rest. One Saturday, while he was repairing a loose step on the porch, he called out, "Ma, do you ever think about moving?" I laughed from the kitchen. "After all this, you'll have to carry me out in the same rocking chair I plan to die in." He chuckled. "That's a no then." Brenda leaned against the doorway, wiping her hands on her jeans. "He worries about you," she said softly. "I know," I replied. "But he's learned to do it without deciding for me. That's love enough." Later that afternoon, we all sat on the porch, sharing slices of apple pie and watching the sky darken into amber. Brenda rested her head on Daniel's shoulder, and for the first time I saw my son completely still. No tension in his jaw, no ghosts behind his eyes. Just peace. He looked at me and said, "You know, I used to think you were unshakable." "I was," I said, "until I had to learn how to break the right way." He nodded, eyes soft. "You did it gracefully." "No," I smiled. "I did it loudly. You just weren't listening." We laughed together, the kind of laughter that lives in the space where pain once echoed. When they left that night, I stood in the doorway long after their taillights disappeared. The wind carried the faint sound of their voices, blending into the hum of the city beyond. I whispered, "Take care of him," though I knew Brenda didn't need the reminder. As the months turned colder, I began writing letters to Franklin, not to send anywhere, just to speak into the quiet. I told him about Daniel's healing, about Leo's stubborn heart softening with age, about how the house had become a refuge again. I told him about the nights I spent sitting by the window, watching the garden survive another season. One evening, I found Leo waiting on the porch with a bottle of red wine. "You're supposed to call before you drive an hour," I scolded gently. He shrugged. "Didn't want to give you a chance to say no." We sat inside, sharing wine and stories until the bottle was empty and the laughter wore us out. At one point he said, "You know, you could have sold this place. Started over somewhere new." "I did start over," I said. "I just did it here." He smiled. "Then this house got lucky twice. Once when Franklin built it, and again when you refused to leave it behind. When he left, I walked him to his truck, the air sharp with the scent of pine. He hugged me tighter than usual. "Don't you dare get old on me," he said. "Too late," I laughed. "I'm already vintage." That night, alone again, I looked around the living room, the framed photos, the light dusting of flour on the counter from Brenda's pie crust, the faint creak of the rocking chair, and realized the house no longer felt like a story of survival. It felt like a story of return. I went upstairs and stood before the mirror, tracing the faint lines around my eyes. There was no trace of fear left there, only memory, softened by time. The kind of face that could tell a lifetime of stories and still have a few left to live. When I turned off the lights, the reflection disappeared, but its warmth stayed. I climbed into bed, the same bed where I'd once pressed ice against a bruise and whispered that I wouldn't break. Tonight, I whispered something else. I made it home. Word count, 845. Awaiting OK. Você diz, OK Voices of Rotero DC, Section 9. Winter came early that year, with snow that fell so softly it looked like forgiveness. The house, wrapped in its quiet glow, felt more alive than it had in years. Every creak was familiar, every draft a whisper of history. I kept the fireplace burning most nights, the smell of cedar and smoke mingling with the faint trace of cinnamon from the tea I'd learned to brew just right. Daniel called more than ever. Sometimes he didn't have much to say, just wanted to hear me breathing on the other end. Brenda had started a small catering business, and her laughter now lived in the background of his calls. "She wants to bring dinner next week," he said once. "She says she owes you a proper meal." "I'll let her owe me," I joked. "It'll give her a reason to keep coming back." We both laughed, the kind of easy laughter that only exists between people who've survived the worst together. The night before their visit, I sat by the fire and reread one of my letters to Franklin. "You'd be proud of him," I wrote. "He finally listens, not to me, but to himself." I sealed it in an envelope I'd never send and tucked it inside the old jewelry box that once caused so much pain. Keeping it there felt like reclaiming something sacred. The next day, the house filled with warmth again. Brenda arrived carrying trays that smelled like roasted garlic and rosemary chicken, Daniel behind her with a bag of oranges and a grin that reached all the way to his eyes. "We brought dinner and dessert," he said. "I hope dessert's not guilt," I teased. "Not this time," he said. We ate in the dining room, candles flickering, the air heavy with comfort. Brenda asked about Franklin, about how we'd met. I told her the story, the night at the small-town fair, the broken carousel light that flickered over his nervous smile, the way he offered me lemonade like it was a proposal. She listened with her chin resting on her hand, eyes soft. "You must have loved him very much," she said. "I still do," I replied. "Love doesn't end. It just learns to change its shape." After dinner, Daniel insisted on doing the dishes. I stood in the doorway, watching him rinse the plates, humming under his breath. I thought about how many years it took for this simple image, to see my son in my kitchen again, peaceful, to feel possible. Brenda joined me at the doorway. "He's different now," she said quietly. "So are you," I said. "You bring calm with you. I didn't think that was possible anymore." She smiled. "You made it possible. You taught him what home should feel like." Her words sat deep in me. For a moment I saw my reflection in the window, the older woman I'd become, and behind it the ghosts of everything I'd lost and found again. I realized then that healing isn't about returning to who you were. It's about becoming someone who can hold peace without letting it slip through your fingers. After they left, the house was still warm from the oven and their laughter. I sat by the fire, the clock ticking softly, the snow beginning again outside. The light from the street lamps painted the yard in silver. Leo called later that night. "How was dinner?" "Perfect," I said. "The kind that makes silence afterward feel like a blessing." He chuckled. "You sound happy?" "I am," I said, surprised by how true it felt. We talked about nothing and everything, about the garden, about the neighbors, about how time sneaks up quietly until you realize you've made peace with it. Before hanging up, he said, "You know, you should write this all down one day, your story." I smiled. Maybe I already am. When the call ended, I stared at the fire until the last log crumbled to ash. The house was silent again, but it didn't feel empty. It felt full of ghosts that no longer frightened me, just companions, reminders that love, loss, and resilience are all branches of the same tree. I went to bed that night, with the snow still falling, thinking of Franklin, of Daniel, of the strange and beautiful ways families break and find their way back. The bruise that once marked me was gone, but its lesson lived quietly beneath my skin. Strength isn't loud. It's the decision to stay soft after the world has tried to harden you. As sleep found me, I whispered the same words I said every night now, a small prayer to the walls that held it all together. Thank you for staying. Word count 845, awaiting OK. Você diz, OK Voices of Rotero DC, Section 10. By the time spring circled back, I had started teaching gardening classes at the community center. At first, I thought no one would come. Who would want lessons from an old widow with shaky hands and a crooked back? But people did come. Young couples, retirees, a single mother with a daughter who reminded me of myself at 12. We planted herbs, tomatoes, and by the end of the season, trust. Every class started the same way. I'd tell them, soil remembers everything you give it, the care, the neglect, the patience. It gives back what you plant, even the things you don't mean to leave behind. They'd smile politely, thinking I was only talking about gardening, but I knew better. Daniel showed up one morning halfway through class, standing near the fence with a cup of coffee in his hands, watching me. When I waved, he smiled. That smile, the real one, was still new to me, and it never stopped feeling like a gift. After the class, we sat under the shade of the old oak tree where the air smelled of mint and damp soil. "You look at peace," he said. "I'm busy," I replied. "Peace is just what happens when you've got your hands in the dirt." He laughed. "Brenda says I should come take your class. She kills everything green." "Tell her she's welcome," I said. "Even the dead things teach us something." He nodded, looking thoughtful. "She's pregnant, Ma." For a moment, everything around me seemed to still. The breeze, the sound of birds, the sunlight stretching across the grass. "Pregnant?" I repeated, my voice trembling between surprise and joy. He nodded again, eyes glistening. "We wanted to wait to tell you until she hit 12 weeks. My throat tightened. I reached for his hand. "You're going to be a father," I whispered. "I just hope I do it better than I did being a son." "You already are," I said, and meant it. When he left, I stayed under the tree, the weight of his news sinking into me like sunlight. A grandchild. A new heartbeat added to the rhythm of our family. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you, Franklin. You were right to believe in tomorrow." That evening, I called Leo. "You're going to be a great uncle," I said. He let out a loud, joyful laugh that filled the line. "Well, I'll be damned. About time that boy did something right." "He's trying," I said, smiling. "You both are," Leo replied. "You just needed the world to stop spinning long enough to catch your breath." In the weeks that followed, I knitted tiny blankets, planted marigolds by the porch, and cleared out the attic that once held secrets. The baby would be born in late summer, when the air smells like ripened peaches and grass after rain. Brenda called one morning, her voice soft with nervous excitement. "Would you come to the doctor's appointment with us? The one for the ultrasound?" I hesitated, just for a second. "Of course," I said. The next day, I sat between them in the small humming room. The doctor pointed at the screen, a blur of light and motion. "There," she said. "That's the heartbeat." Daniel squeezed Brenda's hand, then mine. I felt the pulse of it, not just the baby's, but ours. A new generation, a new chance to do things better. When we left the clinic, Daniel looked at me and said, "I hope it's a girl." "Why?" I asked. "So she can be like you," he said. "Tough, but still kind." Tears stung my eyes, but I just smiled. "Kindness isn't soft, Daniel. It's what survives after everything else breaks." Later that night, I sat on the porch watching the sun set, the air warm and humming with life. The garden glowed gold in the fading light. Every flower, every leaf, every inch of soil seemed to breathe the same quiet truth. Nothing beautiful grows without being buried first. And for the first time since Franklin died, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel in years, hope, pure and uncomplicated, blooming where fear once lived. Word count, 847. Awaiting OK. Você diz, OK Voices of Roteiro. Dice, Section 11. By summer's end, the house was alive with new sounds. Brenda's laughter, the steady rhythm of Daniel's hammer fixing the loose steps again, and the faint squeak of the old rocker on the porch. I'd placed it there so I could sit in the evenings, watching the garden that seemed to stretch brighter with every season. Brenda was glowing now, belly round beneath her sundress. She moved slowly, carefully, the way someone walks through a sacred place. Daniel hovered nearby, protective but gentle, as if he'd learned how to love without smothering. Watching him reminded me of Franklin in our early years, the same nervous tenderness, the same awe at how small and fragile life could begin. "Ma," Daniel said one afternoon, wiping sweat from his forehead, "she wants the baby's middle name to be Franklin. That all right with you?" I couldn't speak for a moment. My throat tightened with joy and grief braided together. "It's perfect," I whispered. That night, after they left, I sat in the nursery we'd set up together. A room that used to be filled with boxes and silence. Now it smelled of fresh paint and lavender. Tiny clothes hung neatly in the dresser. A mobile of stars turned slowly in the air. I touched the crib rail, feeling the smooth wood beneath my fingers. "You'll be safe here," I murmured to the air, as if the baby could already hear me. Leo visited that weekend, grumbling as always about the long drive, but smiling the moment he saw the nursery. "You've gone soft," he teased. "Maybe," I said, "but softness isn't weakness." He nodded, his eyes kind. "No, it's the proof you survived." The heat that summer was relentless, the kind that makes the air shimmer above the road. We all moved slower, as though time itself had decided to rest. Brenda's due date approached, and the anticipation made every day stretch. Then, one evening, just as the sun began to sink, the phone rang. Daniel's voice trembled with both fear and wonder. "She's in labor, Ma. We're heading to the hospital." "I'm on my way," I said, already grabbing my purse. The drive was long, the desert unfolding in dusky gold outside my window. I talked to Franklin as I drove, whispering into the empty car. "You'll be proud, won't you?" he finally learned. By the time I reached the hospital, the hallways were dim, humming with quiet urgency. I found Daniel pacing outside the delivery room, his hands twisting the edge of his shirt. "She's doing fine," he said, his voice a rush of relief. "They said it'll be any minute." We waited together side by side, saying nothing. The clock ticked. A nurse walked by, smiling knowingly. And then, from behind the door, the sound came, the first cry, high and fierce, slicing through the air like sunlight through fog. Daniel froze. His eyes filled instantly. He looked at me, stunned, as if he'd just met the meaning of everything. "It's a girl," he whispered. When the nurse opened the door, he went in first, and I followed quietly. Brenda was holding the baby against her chest, exhausted and radiant. The little one's hair was dark and soft, her tiny hand curling instinctively around Brenda's finger. Daniel turned to me, voice shaking. "Ma, meet Emma Franklin." I reached out and touched her cheek, impossibly small, impossibly warm. "Hello, little one," I said. "You've already fixed more than you'll ever know." In that sterile, glowing room, surrounded by the hum of machines and the faint rhythm of new life, I felt Franklin's presence as clearly as the air itself. The years of hurt, the silence, the fear, they all receded like a tide going out. Later, as they rested, I stepped outside into the hospital garden. The night was still, the sky vast and bright. I looked up and whispered, "She's safe. We all are." The stars didn't answer, but I didn't need them to. The proof was already sleeping 2 floors above me. When I drove home in the early hours, dawn was just breaking. Light poured over the horizon, turning the mountains the color of gold. The world felt young again, as if everything, every wound, every choice, every forgiveness, had led to this single, perfect morning. I parked in the driveway and sat there for a long time, letting the quiet wrap around me. I thought of the little girl now breathing steady and new, and of the house waiting behind me, patient and alive. "Welcome to the world, Emma," I whispered. "You're already home." On word count, 850. Awaiting OK. Você diz, OK Voices of Roteiro DC, Section 12. The weeks after Emma's birth blurred together in the most beautiful way. Days measured not by hours, but by her tiny breaths, her soft cries, the quiet miracles that arrived without announcement. Daniel and Brenda spent their first month back and forth between their house and mine, bringing Emma whenever they could. The baby seemed to fill every corner of my world, her laughter echoing through the same rooms that once carried pain. I became Nana again, a name I hadn't heard since Daniel was small. The first time Brenda said it aloud, I nearly cried. "She knows your voice," Brenda said as Emma turned toward me. "She always calms down when she hears it." I smiled, though my chest ached with tenderness. That's because she recognizes stubbornness. It's a family trait. Every morning, I'd hum the same tune Franklin used to play on the radio, an old waltz that once floated through this house during Sunday breakfasts. When Emma slept in my arms, I swore she breathed in rhythm with it. Sometimes, when the light hit just right, I almost saw Franklin sitting in his old chair by the window, smiling the way he did when joy came quietly. Leo came by often, gruff as ever, pretending not to melt when Emma wrapped her hand around his finger. "She's got her grandmother's grip," he said. "God help anyone who crosses her." Daniel laughed. "She's got my temper too." "Then she's doomed," Leo replied. We laughed, the kind of laughter that warms a house from the inside out. But amid all the new life, small ghosts still lingered. Some nights I'd wake before dawn, the moonlight slicing across the floorboards, and I'd think about the years lost to silence, the way love can bend and almost break under the weight of pride and shame. I'd whisper, "We made it," just to remind myself that survival wasn't luck. It was a choice we'd all made together, one day at a time. One afternoon, while Brenda and Emma napped upstairs, Daniel and I sat on the porch sipping lemonade. The air was heavy with summer, the sky wide and pale. "I was thinking," he said, tracing the rim of his glass, "about selling our place and moving closer." I studied him. "Closer, how close?" He shrugged. "Next door, maybe. There's a house for sale down the street, small but enough." The thought settled in my chest like warmth spreading. "You really want to come back here?" He smiled faintly. I think I never stopped wanting that. It was quiet for a while, the kind of silence that only comes when words have done enough. Then he said, "I wish Dad could see her." "He does," I said. "You just have to look in the right places." A soft breeze moved through the yard, rustling the rosemary and sunflowers. I took it as an answer. That night I wrote another letter to Franklin. "Our boy came home," I wrote, "and he brought a piece of heaven with him. The house forgave us, and so did time." I tucked the letter into the jewelry box beside the others, my private archive of gratitude. By late summer, Daniel and Brenda had bought the little house down the street. We spent a week painting walls, planting herbs, and hanging curtains. The air smelled of new beginnings and old soil. On the last day, Brenda handed me a small wooden plaque she'd found at a flea market. It read, "Roots take time, but they never forget where they belong." I hung it by my front door. Now, every morning, I walk to their house with fresh bread or flowers from my garden. Sometimes Emma crawls toward me, squealing with joy, arms open wide. Her tiny hands clutch at my sleeves, her laugh bright and full. When I lift her, I feel the pulse of everything I almost lost and everything I got back. There's peace in the ordinary now. Sunlight on the counter, a baby's giggle, Daniel's hammer in the distance. Life, I've learned, doesn't erase its scars. It grows around them, like vines climbing the side of a house, stronger, rooted, unashamed. And on evenings when the house grows still, I sit by the window, watching the lights flicker from Daniel's porch down the street. I whisper, "We're all home now," and the night answers back with a kind of quiet that feels like forever. Word count, 846, awaiting OK. Você diz, OK Voices of Roteiro DC, Section 13. Autumn returned again, slow and golden, and with it came the steady rhythm of days that finally felt safe. The air smelled of apples and smoke, and the mountains beyond the neighborhood turned the color of rust and honey. Emma had learned to walk, wobbly steps that made her laugh at her own courage, and the house, my house, echoed with her tiny feet whenever she visited. Every Sunday became ritual. Daniel and Brenda would arrive before noon, Emma running ahead of them, shouting, "Nana!" before I could even open the door. She'd go straight for the drawer where I kept the wooden spoons, pulling them out to use as drums. I'd pretend to scold her, then hand her a pot lid so we could make music together. The sound of her laughter did something miraculous. It replaced every echo of argument that had once lived inside these walls. The ghosts of old wounds seemed to shrink with every beat of her joy. Leo came by one afternoon to bring me a jar of his homemade preserves. "You've turned this place into a sanctuary," he said, looking around at the new photographs lining the shelves. Daniel and Brenda holding Emma, me holding Emma, Emma holding a sunflower bigger than her head. "It's always been one," I said. "We just forgot how to pray inside it." He nodded, his eyes softening. "You ever think about what's next?" I smiled. "I used to. Now I just live the day I'm in." Still, sometimes when the nights grew long and the house quiet, I'd feel a tug in my chest, a whisper of the years gone by too fast, the people who didn't get to see this piece unfold. I'd picture Franklin sitting at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup, listening to the hum of family downstairs. I hoped he knew that his love had stretched far beyond his lifetime. One morning, while pruning the garden, I found an old silver coin half buried in the soil. Faded, worn smooth by time, but still shining in places. I rubbed it clean between my fingers and smiled. "You again," I whispered, remembering that Franklin used to hide coins in the yard for Daniel to find when he was a boy. Maybe he'd left this one for Emma. I placed it on the windowsill inside the kitchen, where the sunlight caught it every morning. A quiet reminder that the past doesn't vanish, it just changes its shape until it fits the present. That afternoon, Daniel stopped by alone, holding a cardboard box. "We're moving the last of our stuff," he said. "Brenda's already down the street with Emma. I wanted to give you this." Inside the box were old cassette tapes, recordings Franklin had made decades ago of our family singing on Christmas mornings, Daniel's baby laughter, even my voice reading bedtime stories. I pressed a hand to my mouth, tears spilling before I could stop them. "I thought they were gone," I whispered. "I found them in one of your attic boxes," he said. "I fixed the player. Want to hear?" He set it up on the counter, pressed play. The tape hissed, then the soft crackle of time. And then Franklin's voice filled the room, warm, steady, alive. "Ada, this one's for you," he said, before laughter drowned him out. Daniel and I stood there, listening, neither of us speaking. It felt like the past and present had finally shaken hands. When the tape clicked off, Daniel said, "You think she'll remember him? Emma, I mean." "If we tell his stories often enough," I said. "Memory's just love that refuses to fade." He smiled, leaned over, and kissed my forehead. "You taught me that." That evening, after he left, I sat by the open window and listened to the night settle over the town. Somewhere, a train passed in the distance, low and mournful, and I thought of all the versions of myself who had once stood in this same spot, lonely, frightened, angry, hopeful. They were still here, all of them, stitched into the walls and floorboards. But they no longer carried pain. They carried proof. I picked up my knitting from the armchair, soft yarn in shades of gold and brown. I was making a blanket for Emma, a warm thing for the winter ahead, woven from the colors of survival. As I worked, I realized the house no longer needed protecting. It had become its own guardian, filled with laughter, with roots, with generations that would outlast me. And in that thought, there was peace. Not the fragile kind that trembles when the wind changes, but the kind that stays, steady and sure, even after the last candle burns low. Word count, 846. Awaiting OK, você diz. OK Voices of Roteiro DC, Section 14. By winter, the rhythm of our lives had settled into something that felt almost sacred. Emma's laughter was the new heartbeat of the house. Daniel's visits were steady as the sunrise, and Brenda had started leaving jars of homemade preserves on my porch, just because. The storm that once tore us apart had become the foundation for everything soft that followed. One snowy afternoon, I stood by the kitchen window, watching flakes swirl through the garden. The rosemary bushes were dusted white, the sunflowers long gone but their stalks still standing, proud even in dormancy. I thought of myself that way sometimes, bent but never broken. Leo called, his voice bright even through the static. "Got your Christmas tree up yet?" "I'm getting to it," I said. Takes me longer these days. You need help? No, I said, smiling. This is something I like to do alone. It's how I talk to him. He didn't need me to explain who him was. Then make it a good one, he said softly. After we hung up, I went to the attic and pulled out the old box marked Christmas, fragile. Inside were ornaments older than Daniel, each one a tiny memory. The glass angel Franklin bought our first winter together, the wooden train Daniel carved in middle school, the glittery star Leo's wife had made before she passed. Each piece carried fingerprints of lives still intertwined with mine. I decorated slowly, humming the waltz Franklin used to love. The house smelled of pine and cinnamon. The lights reflected off the window, casting warm halos across the walls. By the time Daniel and Brenda arrived with Emma, the tree was glowing. Emma gasped when she saw it. Magic, she whispered, her voice full of awe. Exactly, I said, lifting her so she could hang the smallest ornament, a golden bell Franklin had given me the year Daniel was born. You know what this means? I asked. She shook her head. It means the house is listening. That night after dinner, we all sat by the fire. Brenda dozed off on the couch with Emma curled on her chest. Daniel stared into the flames. You ever think about selling? He asked softly, half teasing, half serious. Never, I said. This house carried every version of us. It deserves to see how the story ends. He nodded. I think about that a lot. About legacy. Legacy isn't what you leave behind, Daniel, I said. It's what stays alive in the people who remember you. He smiled faintly. Then you've done a good job. The wind picked up outside, snow tapping gently against the window. The fire crackled. For the first time in decades, I realized there was no fear left in me. Not of loneliness, not of loss, not of what tomorrow might take. I had already survived the worst, and still, the world had given me beauty again. When they left that night, I walked them to the porch. The air was sharp with cold, the stars bright enough to touch. Brenda kissed my cheek. Merry Christmas, Ada. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Daniel hugged me tight. We're lucky you never gave up on us. I almost did, I said honestly. But then I remembered your father's words. You can't build love on silence. So I started speaking again. He nodded, and I started listening. I watched their car disappear down the snowy road, tail lights glowing like small embers in the dark. When the sound faded, I went back inside, the warmth of the fire wrapping around me. I stood before the tree, its lights blinking softly, and felt Franklin everywhere, the hum in the walls, the scent of pine, the steady peace in my chest. I whispered, You can rest now. We're all okay. And for the first time in years, I felt his answer, not in words, but in the soft flicker of the lights, the quiet settling of the house, the heartbeat of a home that had finally learned to heal. Word count, 849. Awaiting OK. Você disse, OK Voices of Roteiro disse. Section 15. Spring returned gently, as if it didn't want to wake the house too abruptly. The air carried that familiar scent of rain and blooming earth, the same one Franklin used to say meant, the world is forgiving us again. I stood on the porch one morning with a cup of tea, watching sunlight creep across the garden. The rosemary was thick and wild now, the soil rich from years of tending. It had been 2 years since the storm that nearly tore everything apart, and yet somehow the house felt younger than ever. Daniel and Brenda's little home down the street was bursting with life. Emma had grown into a curious, bright-eyed toddler with curls the color of sand and a will as fierce as her grandmother's. Most mornings, she'd run down the sidewalk barefoot, clutching a flower or a rock she thought was treasure. I'd see her coming and open the gate before she even called out, Nana. That morning was no different. She came sprinting, breathless and laughing, clutching something small in her hand. Look, she shouted, holding up a coin. I smiled. You found it again. It was the same old silver coin I'd discovered in the soil last year, the one Franklin had hidden decades ago for Daniel. Emma had found it once before, then lost it, and now here it was again, returned like a message. It's magic, she whispered. It is, I said. You just have to believe in what's buried. We spent the morning in the garden, her small hands digging beside mine. She talked about things only a 3-year-old could. Clouds shaped like bunnies, the smell of the sky, how flowers might have dreams. I listened like it was gospel. By afternoon, Daniel came by, carrying fresh bread. Brenda says hi, he said. She's at the shop, busy season. He looked around the yard, admiring the new blooms. You've outdone yourself, Ma. I brushed dirt from my hands. No, the garden just knows I'm finally paying attention again. We sat on the porch steps, sharing bread and lemonade. Emma chased butterflies in the grass, her laughter carrying on the breeze. Daniel looked at her, then at me. You ever think about how close we came to losing all this? Every day, I said. That's why I don't take any of it for granted. He nodded, quiet for a moment. I still feel guilty sometimes. Good, I said softly. Guilt keeps you honest, but don't let it keep you stuck. You did what mattered. You came home. He smiled then, the same tired, grateful smile I'd seen in Franklin after long days at work. You're stronger than all of us combined, Ma. No, I said. I just remembered sooner that love is worth fighting for. The wind stirred the chimes by the porch, their song blending with the rustle of leaves. The sound was soft, almost holy. As the sun began to set, Brenda walked up the path, her apron still dusted with flour. She kissed Daniel's cheek, hugged me, and lifted Emma into her arms. She's been telling everyone she found treasure, Brenda said, laughing. She did, I said, and she's part of it. We stood together, watching the sky shift to gold, then lavender. The air hummed with life, the kind that stays long after the day ends. I realized, standing there between my son, his wife, and the grandchild who carried all our second chances, that this quiet moment, was what every struggle had been leading toward. Later that night, after they'd gone home, I walked through the house one last time before bed. The rooms glowed in the dim light, filled with echoes of laughter and love. I stopped by Franklin's photo, tracing the edge of the frame. We did it, I whispered. They're safe. We're home. The wind outside carried the faint sound of children's laughter from down the street. I smiled, knowing the house had finally become what it was always meant to be, a home that healed everyone who stepped inside. And as I turned off the light, I felt it again. The steady hum of life, warm and whole, whispering through the walls like a heartbeat that belonged to all of us. The house has grown quiet again, but it is a different kind of quiet now, no longer haunted, no longer heavy. It breathes with me. Each morning, sunlight pours through the kitchen window and rests on the rosemary I planted years ago, its scent mixing with coffee and memory. I no longer flinch at the creak of the floors or the hum of the pipes. Those sounds are the house reminding me it's still alive, still keeping time with my heart. I walk through each room slowly, touching the walls as if greeting old friends. Here, the corner where Franklin once tripped over a box of books and laughed so hard he cried. There, the place where Daniel and I shouted and then learned how to listen again. Every inch of this home holds proof that love, when it chooses to stay, can outlast the noise of pain. Some evenings I sit on the porch and watch the lights flicker on in Daniel's house down the street. I can hear Emma's laughter through the open window, Brenda's voice calling her to dinner. The rhythm of their lives hums faintly through the air, a steady reminder that healing is never a straight road. It's a circle that keeps bringing you back to what matters. Leo visits on Sundays with bread and bad jokes, pretending he's checking on me, though we both know he just likes to sit in the warmth of a house that forgave everything. We share wine and silence in equal measure. He tells me I should write a book, but I smile and say, it's already written in the walls. Sometimes I still dream of Franklin, never as he was at the end, but as the man who built this home with his bare hands and an unshakable belief that families, no matter how fractured, could always find their way back. In the dream, he stands at the edge of the garden, sunlight behind him, and I hear him say, "You kept the promise." When I wake, I know it's true. I kept it, for him, for Daniel, for Emma, for the life that almost slipped away. Now, when the day settles into night and the wind moves softly through the chimes, I whisper the same words I've said every evening since peace found me again. Thank you for staying. And I swear, somewhere in the quiet, the house answers back. If this story touched your heart, leave me a comment and tell me from which corner of the world you hear me. Give it a like so it can reach someone who needs to believe in forgiveness, and subscribe to stay close as our stories keep unfolding. And now, go ahead and watch the next video that's waiting on your screen. The journey continues there.